Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Thank you all. This is our regular, what are we calling this? The Public Safety Financing Team. Technically, it's a Board of County Commissioners meeting because we have a quorum here. So I'm going to do away with some of the formalities. First thing on so this is a special meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. It is Monday. It is 11:38 on May 19th. First thing on the agenda is public comment. Anyone here to make a public comment? And thank you, Peter. If you're on Zoom and you're here to make a public comment, you can raise your hand. Megan, do we have any members of the public on Zoom?
We do have one person on Zoom, but they are not raising their hand. It's Frank, though. I believe he is part of this.
Okay. I'm going to close public comment. We heard a doorbell ring, wanted to make sure it wasn't a member of the public raising their hand. And so, yeah, now we're into, this is the joint meeting with the municipalities, the Emergency Services General Improvement District Board of Directors, which is Jody and Rebecca and I, and the Clear Creek Fire Authority Board of Directors to discuss public safety financing. What we have on the agenda formally is to share this presentation that Colton has built, describing the situation with Clear Creek General Fund and the sustainability of our services. We wanted to share this all with you. I think the intent here is to, seek your feedback, first off, make sure that this information you understand. So if you have questions about it, please ask them in real time. And also any feedback on how we're presenting it is welcome. Once we get done with this, I think we're just going to open it up for continued conversation about the various tax options and how we feel at them. There's kind of a natural segue because the end of this presentation is that. Any comments before I hand it to Colt? I want to welcome Georgia, police judge in Georgetown. And
Hi, everybody. How are you?
Welcome.
Yay, Georgetown.
Okay. Colt.
Okay. All right, so this is a little bit reordered than the printout, and we changed a couple of words in one of the slides before this presentation in your printout, but it should largely match. This is just based on some, not really feedback, but just impressions we got from St. Mary's, where we did do this first, just to make it a little bit more clear and make the narrative a little bit more consistent across the presentation. So what we're going to start out is basically what.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is this the presentation that you're also presenting at your town meetings?
Yes.
It is. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It looks a little bit different than the one that was directly at St. Mary's, but it's 99%.
Thank you.
So what we're going to talk about is this is the presentation that we're using to kind of queue up the reaction to the public. It's our best way to explain a very complicated last 10 years of financial chain transitions that the county has been through and where we need to get to still. It also we want the public's feedback. We want them to understand exactly how taxes are paid for, how those kind of mechanism works, things that we've largely talked about in this meeting. So this is our attempt at it. So any feedback is welcome. Just because we're trying to speak to a more general audience here. Okay, so what we start is basically the historic revenue breakdown. These are actual sales tax, property tax receipts from Clear Creek County starting in 15-16, which was the peak of the mine's evaluation, down to 2025, which is our last assessed year in our budget, right? So we have, these are the actual returns from tax revenue, and we are down $15.3 million in the general fund from property tax alone in 10 years.
And that's annual?
It's annual, a year, right? So Yes, and that includes the historic increased evaluations across the board for every other type of property, right? That's included in this. But again, that's the fall off that something like a huge extraction operation like Henderson can have on property tax. So 15.3 down. We've had 2 sales tax increases since 15. That's the EMS sales tax and the public road and bridge sales tax. That nets us 4.5 million. So we're still down 9.45 million, right? That's not an exact subtraction because there's certain reductions that happened in our costs that won't come back, right? So really this 9.45 million is what we're trying to make up, right? So it's not necessarily that we're going to go back to what the county looked like. The goal is not to go back to what the county looked like in 15. It's to be a more efficient version of something that we can substantially maintain. So that's our current net shortfall, right? Is the 9.45 million. Commissioner's goals. This is not all of them, but these are goals that largely deal with financial sustainability, right? First one is a facilities assessment where we look at all the space the county's losing, figure out where we can consolidate and divest of certain properties. This is really about not so much the marginal cost of having additional buildings, but the long-term capital liability of operating buildings that are not being used. Because eventually you do have to replace the roof, AC, boiler, things like that, right? So we need to get as much of that off the books as possible. The jail assessment, you'll see jail come here twice. The specific goal of the board is to look at our current detention, processing, and confinement operation. That is how the jail operates now, or the opportunity to potentially enter into an IGA with another local government to have them handle the confinement for us for a fee rather than us operating our own jail. High level staffing analysis. This is basically starting in 2005, going to 15, and then coming back to 2025 to see how staffing grew with the mine, how the county's service operations changed as revenues went up, and then what was reduced when it came back down, right? The reason we did 2005 is not necessary. It is nice that it's 10 years on both sides of 15, but it's also because the county's population was almost exactly the same in 2005, right? So we're talking about a county that has not grown in 20 years, where the Front Range has grown nearly 40%, right? Economic development. This is more of a long-term thing. These are very slow moving changes, but they're things that if you don't start now, you'll never do, right? And so this is a goal of the board to really start pushing this forward, start dedicating real resources to this conversation to potentially change how not only the county generates its revenue, but also how people interact with the county, right? What does that long-term, more sustainable economy look like? The steps to close a deficit, this is basically just a high level of the order of operations, right? Once you know you have a budget deficit, whether it's a private company or not, the first thing you need to do is enact controls and costs, right? So we'll talk about that in the presentation, spending controls and reducing base services. Then you need to assess your gap, understand the size of your gap, what the historical trend says. Is this a short-term problem or a long-term problem, right? This changes how you look at the problem. And then you need to update your forecasts to get known near-term opportunities into your forecast, right? Because you don't want to overshoot, right? You don't want to say, hey, this is our discrete gap year over year, but then maybe there's an opportunity that's a couple of years out that's going to bring in a significant amount of revenue. You don't want to you don't want to try to solve your current deficit if there's incoming revenue that's on the horizon, right? So we need to take that out of the gap. And then we need to really talk to the voters about voter approved revenue, right? Or further cuts in service. Like once you've done all three of those things, those are really at this point, your options. So we want to talk about that in this presentation as well. So the first thing is implementing cost controls. Since 15 to 25, there has been almost 35 FTE reduction in county staff. We have rebid stop loss insurance, which is, for those who don't know what that is basically the insurance policy you carry against your health insurance if you're self-insured, right? So if you're self-insured and you, for whatever reason, blow your your balance, that's what you pay for an insurance policy against that risk. We moved county dispatch to Jeffcom, right? So that in total, that's $3.65 million in cost controls. Some of those are permanent. Some of them we'll try to buy back if we do improve revenue to bring base services back to what they were. Right? There is a 1 to 5 year need. That's your immediate need, right? So this is, now we're analyzing our gap, okay? We have a 1 to 5 year need. General fund operating deficit, that is our current budget deficit on the general fund, right? That is what we're eating into fund balance every year, right? We also have a workforce compensation gap. This includes both competitive retirement and competitive pay. Our turnover rate last year peaked at 42%, right? More than 50% of the employees of the county have been here less than 2 years. That is not a sustainable model. And the primary reason they leave is compensation. They can make much more money down the hill or in other counties or other local governments. And so we got to, that is an extremely expensive and inefficient turnover rate. 40% is crazy. And also, and we have improved, we're down to 30. It's still twice the turnover rate you would expect from local government, excluding teachers. The other critical need is we need a third ambulance, right? We need a third ambulance crew. We are almost at, we will hit 800 runs per ambulance. This is way more than 400 or 500 that we see in our peer counties. This is unsustainable workload for EMS. And this is an absolute critical need because we are going to, relying on Gilpin every third day is not sustainable for us at this point.
A quick question.
Yeah.
So we don't need another ambulance. We just
Need the
more-
crew.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Yes. The near term needs, this is more 3 to 5 years, right? There are essential grant supported programs, CCHAT, Community Health, Human Services, Mountain Youth Network, also capital projects. This is not something that was in the original gap analysis when this was done a couple of years ago because the federal ecosystem for grants has changed so much. If we lose this funding, these programs likely just go away, right? So we can take control of these programs by making sure they're funded at the local level, or we are at risk of losing them completely, right? This also includes the money that we get for capital projects that we currently don't budget for. We're very reliant on grants for some types of capital projects. We also have a sustainability issue in our capital funding, right? You annualize where cost controls hit first is usually almost always capital replacements. That truck can last 2 more years. That roof can wait. That HVAC system can wait, right? We have created quite a backlog in 10 years since 15 to the point where something like 70% of our fleet is from 2015 or before, right? We are replacing like an engine every quarter at this point in the sheriff's office, right? Where our vehicles are getting more expensive to operate in their current capacity than if we got new ones, right? Same thing with our buildings. HVAC systems fail, not doing preventative maintenance, not doing extending service life means you're now going from a planned replacement to an emergency replacement, which is way, way, way more expensive, right? So we have an annualized shortfall of another $750,000 on the capital front. This includes basically fixed assets, buildings, and vehicles. Total shortfall, $7 million, right? So we take our gap, we know what cost controls we've done, right? We're still at about a $7 million gap to get to a sustainable revenue model for the county. So we have some near-term opportunities, right? Property tax growth. This is the two of these are the largest housing development program projects this county has ever seen in 4 Points and in Bighorn Crossing, right? That's 185,000. It's not a ton, right? There is an opportunity to potentially change our jail operations that could include that IGA we talked about before. It's also include taking on more Marshall inmates. There's potentially, the low number there is 500,000. There is some change to the jail operation that can lead to that revenue number. So that's a near-term opportunity that's coming, right? Tolling, parking enforcement, and parking fees. This includes parking fees on some of our open space parking lots. This includes potentially tolling Guanella Pass. This also includes more enforcement, either photo enforcement or increased ticketing by the sheriff's office. This is a number that we're pretty confident we can hit, right? Health clinic debt service right now.
Quick question.
Yep.
A tolling, parking and enforcement, that is only an unincorporated Clear Creek, right?
Mostly, yeah. I think all of it is.
Okay.
I guess unless the only caveat to that would be Georgetown.
Well, or a officer pulling somebody over in town here.
You know what I mean?
Okay, okay.
But as far as tolling and parking enforcement, yes.
But Idaho Springs, you might know the answer to this. When a sheriff deputy writes a speeding ticket on Colorado Boulevard, is that a municipal offense or are we writing to a state offense?
Or county.
Very interesting. I don't know the answer to that. I would think it would be where all your other tickets go, the sheriff's office, I would think.
Okay.
It should.
Thanks.
I don't think we see it. I wouldn't go through our court. I don't believe.
I have a question about the open space too. Does that money need to go back into open space then?
Probably.
Yeah.
It depends on how the parking lot was built. So in cases where open space funds were used to build a parking lot, it needs to stay inside that fund.
So the Floyd Hill parking lot doesn't benefit the county, well, directly, it goes.
Not the general fund, and I believe that's the case, right?
It's not a general fund help.
But the healthier you can make your other funds, the healthier you can make the general fund by more costs coming off the general fund, if they're eligible, right? Revenue is revenue in this point. Health clinic debt service, this is the payment that the county makes towards the debt service of the health clinic. This should be coming off in 2030. Any questions here? Okay, so now to summarize what we've talked about, $7 million structural deficit, near-term opportunities, right? Remaining gap, 4.8 million. Okay. That is the combination of the 9 million structural deficit, right? Minus the cost controls. Granted out the near-term opportunities, which we don't really have to change anything to get. We have a remaining gap of 4.8 million, right?
Okay, so
That's-
5 years is considered near term.
It's near and immediate. It's near and immediate, right? Immediate is like right now, like we have a problem right now. Every single year we sit in immediate is an additional liability. Near term is closer to, we can wait a little bit longer. Those funds will not hit our books. Those costs will not hit our books immediately. Capital is a great example of that,
So
right? You
for
can
this
stretch your,
building, 5 years, we
Yes.
can handle.
yes.
All right.
That's kind of the idea here, right? We're not trying to rip the whole Band-Aid off in 1 year. Which is also why we annualized our capital liability. If I said we need to fix all of our backlog capital in 1 year, you're looking at $3 million in capital liability plus, right? But that's really not how capital works. You don't replace your whole fleet in 1 year. You don't fix all the buildings at once, right? You look at your critical deficiencies and you replace that first, and things that can wait a little bit longer, you can kind of just work your way through it.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is we've worked through that process slide, right? We've identified our gap. We've looked at our forecasts. We've done our cost controls. That's the wrong order. Apologize. But now we have to look at that last step, which is either service cuts or revenue generation, voter approved revenue generation, right? So I made this pie chart in an attempt to explain how tax liability falls for a normal family, right? This is a median family in this county's income breakdown, according to the Consumer Expenditure Survey, which tracks how people spend their money, right? So this is your household budget, right? So for a median family and a median income, they spend 11% on groceries, 31% on sales taxable expenses. These are hard products that are not groceries, tires, toilets, plywood, right? Things like that, computers. There's other expenses. This is health costs or things that are not attorney's fees, things that are not tax eligible items, mostly services. If you look at who pays for services, businesses pay for services way more than individual people do, right? They do it, but it is not a huge portion of their income. And then the more money you make, The more you save, the less money you make, the less you save. So a median person and a median income in this home will save 6% of their annual income, right? So this explains how tax burden falls. And the reason we want to go into this is it very much affects how much people spend on sales tax, right? And property tax, right? When we talk about cuts, right? Basically, at a $5 million real deficit to the general fund, we're talking about reduced patrol coverage, longer response times for emergency services up to an hour and exceeding an hour. Community services, right? Non-existing code enforcement, elimination of the roundabout transit network, closure of the transfer station, community development, limited support for affordable housing, childcare, economic development, public health, restricted clinic hours, elimination of mountain use network, reduced preventative health services, administrative services. We're talking about way longer processing times for planning, permit, vital records, right? This is gonna be across the board elimination, right? $5 million worth of FTEs is like 70 people, 60 people, right? That's basically cutting our staff in half again. And so that's why everything will be affected, right? If we cannot close the gap. Okay, so tax summary options. Ones we've modeled, 2% public safety sales tax, exempting food for the entire sales tax stack for the county, right? So we can't just say the additional 2% public safety tax will exempt groceries. You have to say all county sales tax exempt groceries. So this is a 2% increase in the county tax rate, exempting food from the existing 2.65% as well as the additional 2%, right? We also have a 2% public safety tax, no exemptions. That's exactly how it's operating now. We also have a hybrid, a 1% public safety sales tax and a 7 mil increase to the general services mill, okay? This does exempt food through the whole existing sales tax. So that just reaffirms our existing short haul. Each option tries to balance the revenue needs with its effect across both residents, businesses, and visitors. And you'll see that in the examples here. You guys have already seen this before. Because this presentation is primarily for residents, we did eliminate the business option on here because it doesn't really work the same way for businesses, and it just kind of confuses things for people who might be coming at this with various levels of comfort with this subject. You've seen these numbers before, but what I've itemized out is what happens when you exempt food, okay? So the annual sales tax increase to your taxable goods is the first column, right? Family of 4, elderly, single, wealthy couple, low income renter, single family, single parent with 2 kids. The important thing about this single family is they're house poor. So this is our house poor person, okay? This person who spends more than 40% of their income on their mortgage, okay? That savings, it assumes they do 100% of their food shopping in the county. And the reason that assumption is because you either go to Safeway or you don't, right? Groceries are very habitual, right? People go to the same grocery store all the time. That's why if you've ever noticed different companies, King Soopers, Walmart, Safeway, they all put the aisles in different ways to make it really confusing to walk in there and find what you need unless you've gone to that store 100 times. That is their way to build that habit, right? Because if you're just price shopping everything, you're going to be adding 20, 30 minutes to your grocery trip because you can't find anything, right? This is very intentional. And that's because they're trying to build that habitual habit, right? When you net, it also assumes that only 50% of your taxable income, your taxable expenditures for sales tax on all the other categories are done in the county. The reason we do that is because we don't have everything here. It's very difficult to buy a toilet here. I think Rebecca's mom said it, Beth, there's nowhere to buy underwear, right? So like, we know there are services that are not here, right? Now you can offset that by ordering online. But given that some people spend very little amount of their personal income, this is more true on the east side of the county that is not in the county. And we have people who are really embedded in the west side of the county who spend a lot of that income in the county. And online sales are county sales, right? we 50% is fair, right? So if you do spend less, if you do primarily shop at the Walmart and Jeffco, you'll pay less than this, right? If you don't do that and you shop primarily in the county, you will spend more than that. But this is just a place to start the demonstration, right? The impact here is $3.7 million net. This is significant. I need to fix that slide. But it's not savings. It's significant savings on food, but it is a net increase for every other person within the county. And that net change is that last column, right? Obviously, your house poor people that spend a huge amount of their income on their home don't have as much to spend on other things. So their sales and tax is way less than people who have a lot of disposable income. I'm thinking of the wealthy couple in $1 million home making $250 a year. They're spending $700 more on this tax increase because the proportion of their income they spend on food is way less than what they spend on other stuff because there's only so much money you can spend on groceries. Does that make sense to everyone, this slide? Okay. Go ahead.
The only thing I was gonna say between this one with food exempt and the one without food exempt is under impacts and I don't know if you want to put this in writing or not, but what you were talking about at another meeting about the risk of losing the Safeway if the tax gets too high in the county and people, that's the tipping point. They start.
Yeah, I struggle with saying that in a public meeting.
Okay.
Because I'm talking about their business, but in generality, I am very concerned, which I've talked to this group about the financial sustainability of that Safeway, given how much of their business is being cannibalized specifically by the Walmart
Right.
at
El Rancho.
Right. And we can see how many people outside of Idaho Springs, really, even as far as Silver Plume, use that Walmart more than the Safeway, right? So you're already talking about a very small customer base that's got a very, very, very successful competitor within 20 minutes of 50% of the housing of this county, right? And then that's a real problem, right, for that model.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I wanted to let you finish the thought. This is a public meeting. It is being broadcast.
Yes, but
But
I
it's
don't know.
something we can legitimately be concerned about
Yes.
for the benefit of our county.
I guess when I mean to say a public meeting, I mean a meeting with the public where they can then ask questions about the Safeway that I don't feel comfortable asking.
Because you don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, public safety sales tax, no exemption. So this is just the flat increase, right? No exemptions on food, no property tax increase, right? By far the largest amount of money, but is also clearly the most expensive. Without netting out those food savings, you're pretty much just, I think the lowest is about $300 for that single parent with the limited amount of disposable income, right? The highest is the wealthy couple at about $1,200 a year, right? Because, and that's again, 50% of the sales tax eligible expenses happening in the county, right? But sales tax will generate a lot of revenue from people who live here, especially if they're ordering a lot online, because they spend a huge portion of their income on those expenses, right? The hybrid approach. So this involves both a 1% sales tax, public safety tax, and a 7 mil increase to the general fund levy, right? Because the mill spreads the burden out across every type of business that we have here, not the very narrow part of our economy that actually contributes to sales tax. It generates considerably more money with less burden to the individual person, right? So the 1% change in sales tax that goes up, you're also exempting out 11 to 15% of the revenue generated by the existing 2.65%, right? Which nets out for our two poorest people, right? Or our two over leveraged people on groceries to a savings in their sales tax, right? The family of four and the single parent with two kids will spend less on sales tax than they will. The elderly person will spend $1 more, right? And the low income renter will also spend $1 more, right? Because you're exempting that very large portion of their expenses from the existing stack, essentially that 1% increase nets to zero. It sets to a minor increase, right? But essentially it transfers a lot of the tax liability off of food onto those tax eligible sales, right? Your net property tax will change, right? But again, the $3.2 million that's generated on this is primarily from those 7 mills. And the reason it's so effective at increasing revenue outside of people's residents' individual expenditure is it's very agnostic about what the business is. If you look at the GDP of the county, half of the GDP of the county is not sales tax eligible. It's recreational services, it's fuel, it's a bunch of other stuff that we can't charge sales tax for, right? So what ends up happening is it's the cheapest across the board for everyone, right? As far as the number that it increased, that it generates, because it's grabbing leveling, because it's grabbing vacant land, because it's grabbing mining claims, right? Things that if you're a second homeowner, you don't pay sales tax here, except for the 2 months a year that you're here, right? But you will pay property tax, right? If you're a rafting company, you might not pay sales tax on those rafting trips, but you will pay property tax, right? So it sets a much wider net, which generates the same amount of money with less directed impact on the residents, right? It brings more people into the circle. The reason that property tax is largely very difficult is it's very psychological, right? You can charge person an extra 75 cents, an extra $1, extra $3, every $4. They might not notice on that one transaction. You see your property tax change all at once, right? But it doesn't mean it's more expensive. That sales tax, that every single transaction, you make a lot of transactions throughout your day, right? And that's just a small amount over and over and over again that actually can generate more money out of your budget and be more expensive to the resident than what this is, right? So this minimizes the burden on residents while preserving the essential purposes. It generally provides very progressive tax relief in the sense that the lower income people pay way less of this. And some of them, the low income renter pays $1 more in taxes, right? Now, they might see some indirect increase on their rent, but it's very difficult to model that because some landlords eat that and some don't, right? But for the most part, more of our moderate income families see the least amount of sales increase here. Now, the risk here is that this is 2 ballot measures, right? You can't run these together. You can run them on the same ballot, but they can't be on one vote. It's not an up down, right? So this only works if both pass, right? If you say pass the 1% exempting food and don't pass the mill, it generates almost, right?
Oh, we lose money.
We won't lose money.
If 1% sales tax increase, but get rid of food.
It's pretty much break even.
Oh.
Right. I mean, it might net us a couple 100,000, but it just depends largely on the economy, right? When the economy is doing better, people spend more money on those tax eligible expenses in relation to their income. If the economy is not doing great, they spend more of that money on groceries. So it is a range, like the grocery expenditure fluctuates a lot.
Okay. Well, then the other issue with mills is that all of us just got a huge jump in the value of our property. So people are, even if that gets changed by the state later on, which I understand is a possibility, if they have that huge jump in valuation and then they're asked to vote for additional mills.
Yeah. Makes it politically pretty challenging. This is based on 2025, basically. So our budget. So we don't really know what's going to happen with property tax evaluation, especially with actions at the state. We have no idea what that revenue is going to look like. So it's very difficult to.
And I understand it's difficult with the legislature. Is it a legislature thing or is it I'm assuming the legislature would have an input, but would they affect it before we have to pay additional tax with the increase in valuation of our property?
That's what they did 16 or 18 months ago. Is before the tax bills hit.
Oh,
They went in and lowered assessment rates. They called a special session to do it.
Interesting, but we can't count on that, right? I mean, I don't want to count on it because it would hurt our county, but just,
Yeah,
I don't know what the breaking point is.
I mean, generally, that would be the right thing for them to do, I think, and as far as like timeline, if they wanted to assess people's actual and give counties and local governments the ability to actually budget.
Right.
They need to make that decision before people are starting to model their revenue.
Right.
But again, we don't know.
And do we make more money with the increased assessment of houses or with increased mills on lower
It's a
assessment?
difficult thing to answer because we don't know what's going to happen. People also have the constitutional right to challenge.
Right.
Right. And we don't know how successful those are going to be. We really don't. And so it's very difficult to answer that question.
Okay.
Generally speaking, I would say if I had a bet, I would say no. You're going to generate more money by increasing the RILs than based on whatever the commercial assessment change is. Because again, residential properties are assessed at a very low rate, 6.7%, 6.8%, right? And we don't actually have, outside of Henderson, huge commercial operations where a swing of 2 or 3% of a property valuation is a huge amount of money, right? But I don't know, I really don't know.
I've got a question. over here.
How does fire authority factor into these?
So this is for the countywide public safety tax. We haven't talked about how we're going to split it up amongst fire, EMS and sheriff, right?
If we have a 1% tax, I think we started down this path with how do we fund the fire authority? If I remember back 18 months ago, that's what we started down this path. And I appreciate the 7 additional mills for the county because that's totally justified, but how does this solve the fire authority budget deficit we started with?
Take a stab at that. That is a really bad phrase to use. This presentation, of course, is about the county financial picture. We're not trying to ignore that. We're here to talk about how to fund emergency services for the fire department and the county and how to sequence those needs, et cetera. So I think your question is a question I intended to ask the group when the presentation ends. Like, how do we figure out how to merge these? I don't think anybody in the county is trying to.
Yeah, by no means.
It's the challenge that we've had in building this presentation, and I want to welcome your thoughts, is how at some point you've got to figure out how to simplify. And so like we could have a similarly lengthy presentation about the fire authority's needs as well. So I'll probably stop. I'm just going to stop talking there. And then
The real challenge there, Jeremy, is like it's hard because everything changes once you add the smaller CCFA and these projections, right? Your property evaluation is a lot lower. Your sales tax generation is actually pretty good. It's not a lot lower, but the property evaluation is because it excludes some of the wealthiest and most valuable properties in the county. So now we're talking about 2 tax options with 2 different districts. Like it becomes very confusing. So the idea is more to plant the seed in people's head about how property tax versus sales tax affects them. And then we can talk about the subcomponent of that, which is the fire authority specific situation, because it doesn't encompass the whole county, right? Because it changes everything, quite frankly, on the way this works, especially with property tax. So I think it's helpful, and it's hard not to. It's a difficult thing to explain to people in the amount of time you're going to have their attention. So any feedback you have on that to make this a little bit clearer, I think would be great. And that's it. So
we're at the conclusion of this.
Yeah.
So before we get to like, how do we figure out how to try to meet both of our needs? Are we trying to do that via one ballot measure that's combined? How would we sequence several property tax measures, et cetera? Really would love to hear just how this lands on you, this information about the county specifically, from our partners in the municipality and the fire department. Is it clear? Is there something that you think needs to be added? Is it compelling?
Well, I thought, great presentation. Really good job. Obviously with 2 ballot measures, I don't know, I personally think we might be better off taking on the hard one first, which in my opinion is mills. I agree with Rebecca, and I'm glad she raised the concern about the valuations. And I think a lot of people do not understand that because you may have received a valuation that bumped your property up 20 or 30%, that doesn't mean that your property tax is going up 20 or 30%. It's just there will be fear with folks, and
Especially with that senior exemption.
yeah,
Why we modeled the elderly single people, because I think fixed income individuals are the most likely to feel the real pain of that and have that visceral reaction. But that senior exemption goes a long way in making sure that your property values are not, your property tax is not overly burdensome. And it honestly, the situation with those fixed singles is complicated because the elderly, because they're less mobile generally, they're actually spending way more money on groceries and fixed services in the county because they don't travel as far, right? And they have a lot of, so a lot of times it's the same group, right? And the people that react viscerally to property tax is a lot of times the same group that's actually very burdened by sales tax. They just don't see it, right? It's that kind of very transactional thing, right? It's Amazon's entire business model. They don't want to sell you a car. They want to get 3% on every car that's sold, right? That's why all websites are hosted on their servers. They're just like taking cuts of every single transaction that happens. It's very similar to how sales tax works within the defined economy of what sales tax actually applies to. And we're a very unique county where such a huge portion of the services that are provided in this county are not taxed. And so you have, and a lot of times they're the businesses bringing in the people that create, I think, some of the tension with our residents is the tourists, right? It's the rafting companies, it's Loveland, it's Echo Mountain. It's like that's what's outside of the public land. Those are the businesses bringing in the people, stressing our emergency services, particularly because they're the high risk activities that are really not transactional, like proportionally paying into the sales tax accounts. I mean, what is it, Sharon? What is it, Aaron? Like 14% of our EMS calls go to Loveland, something like that.
It's probably pretty close.
It's like 14 to 15%, and they pay less than 2% of our sales tax. Right. So right now that's a 12% free ride on their liability to the emergency services, right? Same kind of deal. So that's kind of like the very unique way that this county works. Like other larger counties with a lot more developable land have like more diverse economies where sales tax might go farther. But our proximity to the metro, which makes a lot of those industries not economical here, right? Because of how close they are to a competitor and how few people actually live here, make it tough to make that sales tax stretch really far into what people are buying. Because there are certain industries that we would have a really, really, really tough time getting up here to capture more of that sales tax revenue.
Okay, I think you're gonna have a hard sell taking on the mill levy first. I got stopped 3 times just on Saturday during the community cleanup. Someone was getting their value went up 150,000, someone else 75. So I mean, and the folks with the duplex of 150,000, they're gonna dispute that. Well, they're going to be disputing that and challenging that right while you're trying to educate them that, oh, it's a better deal to raise your property taxes. I think that would be a very tough thing since a lot of folks just got hit.
And the timing here, you're going to see how we address the assessed value increase. Like we're going to have better answers over time. Like what do we actually expect in new revenue? What does the fire authority expect in new revenue? How does that change this math?
That was another question that someone was asking. They said, if you wanted tax to be more mills, but you're already getting more value because of the rate, the valuation of the property went up.
It's a very fair point, which is why we're not trying to label this as these will be the options on the ballot. This is more talking about using it as an example to show people how they're currently
Stability.
right? Because yeah, that will change. It could have potentially changed it a lot. We just don't know, right? If the last special section goes the way the last one did, it'll be pretty muted, honestly. But
You mean muted as to
on our
how
bottom,
much they're gonna reduce or
know how
limit?
much we will get in additional revenue based on the evaluation. I just don't know how extreme the adjustments are gonna be,
Right, yeah.
you know?
And there's this element of there's a question about whether the county is subject to a maximum assessed value growth rate of 10.5%. And then there's an option that the board has to lower our mills. I don't know how that affects the ESGID mills. If the ESGID is subject to that cap or not. But there's just a lot of complexity to that we haven't worked through because we all got that information last week when you did. Other thoughts on kind of this presentation, how it's done? We can kind of move into Kelly's, the point that I would have raised too.
I really like the last page that you didn't put up about the risk without additional funding.
Yeah, we moved it to the front.
Oh, did you?
Wanted to talk about it being revenue or service cuts. And
Yeah.
bury the service cuts at the end, because my experience at Mary's, everyone had checked out at that point, right? It's a long presentation with a lot of questions, and so at the end, I want to make sure that people like really internalize, like, hey, this is not going to be a marginal cut. Like, you're talking about to make it us financially. If we had no reserves, right, and we were really doing what we need to do for capital in the long term and shoring up the programs that we have to shore up to meet our statutory requirements, we're talking about a $5 million gap, which again, in terms of an $80,000 employee is 60 plus people, right? That's like a ton of our workforce.
Right.
And that means that all of this, there will be no one immune from that, right? No agency will be immune from that. And so it'll be further reductions across the board, including the elimination of some of them.
For sure. So I think like to try to draw out the important questions here. I want to remind us what we were presented on. And we're just gonna pretend these numbers are still relevant, knowing that they'll change a little bit once we have our heads wrapped around the assessed value thing. If the option is to try to fund the fire department entirely with mills, then you're talking about a final mill rate of around 14 mills. So I think the question in the municipalities, the county can't and wouldn't use our general funds. That's not the situation that the municipalities are in. I think what we need to hear from you is like, what's a mill equivalent out of your general funds to fund the fire department that you could reasonably accommodate? Is it an increase of 5 mills reasonable? Is it not? Is there, I don't know if you all have thoughts on that now or if we're calling that homework, but I think that's an important question for us to start to drill down into. Which combination of property and sales tax do we want to use? How do we want to sequence those things? And then just to take a step back, Jody, Rebecca, if basically we would, if in the property tax scenario, we run an ESGID mill levy that shows up on the ballots of people in the unincorporated portion of the Fire Authority Protection District. Municipalities can run their own ballot measures or figure out how to just fund it out of their existing revenues. And that's how it's structured today. Just so I don't
that's
gloss
interesting.
over that. Any thoughts on kind of that element of this?
George, I would just say, I think it's a very high percentage in Idaho Springs have a lot of faith in the fire authority. I base that on the fact that we went from about $144,000 contribution to the fire authority to about $308,000. And I didn't even receive one person pushing back on that.
Right.
And that tells me that they do have a lot of faith in the fire authority. And I think we're probably the equivalent of about 9 mills right now when you factor that in. I think that we've dodged a lot of bullets here locally. And I think that most of the citizens would be pretty sympathetic to the financial strains that the fire authority is under and would probably support some type of an increase for the fire authority. To be brutally honest, they may not have those same feelings for other government entities, but I can say with confidence they would for the fire authority.
And so part of what I hear is that if you were asked to figure out how to fund another 5 mil equivalent, you'd be on the ballot to do that.
I believe that folks you would have a very decent chance of finding supporters for that.
Any thoughts from Georgetown or Empire?
Not sure.
And essentially, that's what Georgetown's doing now too.
Exactly.
We're covering elevated mill increase or whatever, because we haven't done anything with it, since 89 or 85 or something?
And if I could ask, you're doing it over 2 years, and have you had any pushback?
Not a peep,
That's
not a
great,
peep.
great news.
Does it matter that you did that without increasing taxes?
I'm sure.
I find that when I talk about how I've decided to spend $1 that we already have in one way or another, the conversation's pretty easy. When I start talking about needing another dollar,
Of course.
Yeah, exactly. That makes sense.
so then I think the other thing that we need to wrestle with, if we're talking about a property tax to meet our public safety needs scenario, we can run a ballot measure or maybe a series of ballot measures that kind of cover the CCFA area, right? With only one measure appearing on one person's ballot in an election. And then the county, to meet its public safety needs, would have to do a ballot measure as well that would cover the entire county. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to sequence those two. If we're all trying to look at property tax. Would we be talking about property tax for Clear Creek Fire Authority first? Would we be talking about a countywide property tax for Sheriff's Office EMS first? Opinions on that? Kelly, I think I know yours and I'm going to ask you to go last.
I mean, that's why I've been showing up for the meetings, is to, so we can balance the budget with the fire authority. And that's got me involved.
I think the fire authority is huge because a fire here can affect the fires on the, Evergreen Fire Protection District. But my concern is that we've got a county-wide budget deficit and we really can't kick the ball down the road. We really have to address improving the county's coffers. And, if the municipalities want to run a mill levy increase for the fire department because of the support for that, this is the sausage making part of politics, I guess, but I'm very concerned about our county budget right now. And I think our mission, our goals were to help the county budget this year. And I'm assuming the county contributes to
They do not.
they do not.
What we're having this conversation.
Completely
The
separate.
tax
For a mill levy increase for 7 years.
I really think that we need to be able to have these conversations. I'm not suggesting anything. I think what we're trying to do is figure out each other's opinions and we should be allowed to express them. And so Kelly, you've had your hand up several times.
I think something you need to know so that you can really think out what you're gonna consider is if we don't get approved money on the ballot question this year, whatever's decided, if we don't have extra revenue or the revenue we need next year, I'm gonna have to lay off the shift crew that we put in Georgetown in 2027. They go away, and that gives us money that's left in our reserve fund. Will still be deficit spending, and that money will last until 2031. And then at that point, if we don't have a revenue increase between next year and then, it goes back to 100% volunteer.
Oh, wow.
So in my mind, we are the number one priority. The county is spending at a deficit, but you're not looking at possible bankruptcy, so to speak. And I have charts to show it out. I can project it out in all kinds of different ways. But we need the ESD to go to 9 minimum. That's the only increase we get next year. That will sustain us for a short period. But if we don't get money, and, you know, I asked for a 2021 ballot question on the ESD, and it was denied. And we've been going since then, knowing that we're spending, at one point, we had $6.5 million in. The end of this year, we'll be down to 3.4. That's what's going on. We don't do something.
Yep.
What we have built goes away.
Okay.
And services will be significantly reduced.
Well, as I said, I know that if there's a fire here and the winds go wherever they go, that'll take out the east end too, so,
But you
Kelly,
take the thought of wildfire out of it.
okay?
This is just basic response as we are today. This doesn't improve significantly wildfire response. That's so dynamic to the day and time and what's going.
Right.
But just to have the basic service that we're providing now, that changes without new money next year.
our current just to remind everyone, our current operating budget deficit, I have the benefit of being on both of these boards and having dug into these numbers really carefully with both organizations. The fire authority's current operating deficit is $623,000 a year. So that $3.5 million, Kelly's not wrong. We can blow through that in 5 years. I don't think the timelines are very different for the county. And this isn't this, I don't think that we should be asking each other the question, what matters more, putting out a fire or stopping a heart attack, right? That's not the question I'm trying to present to the group. I'm trying to get our thoughts about what is, because I don't have an answer to that question. The question is, what's strategic in order to go first? How do we combine them? Like, how do we get this done? I don't think anybody here wants to say that one is more important than the other. And that's not what I'm asking anybody to suggest. And I think maybe part of the reaction from the fire authority is you thought I was asking that question. I'm not.
Honestly, the reaction is I've got employees that need job stability. They're not hearing from the board in this collective group. I need job security to the point that I'm this close to saying I'm done. I can find something else. And that's an issue across the board as I lose employees for the same reason. And we've been having this same conversation year over year over year. And I'd like to see it come to some kind of resolution. As part of this process. Otherwise, why have I been sitting here for this entire time trying to go through this process? So am I frustrated today for the first time in this whole process? Yeah, very much so. Because I have conversations with my employees about their long-term viability. And it's hard to give them even a reasonable answer what the viability looks like for their job. As we currently sit today in May, when I anticipated us having this something figured out on this 2 months ago. to give them some kind of concrete idea of where we were going, the direction we're going. Currently have no direction quite in this group. I understand the county needs funds, totally understand it. Huge issue. EMS needs another crew, 100% needs another crew. We've been asking for funds year over year. The answer has been, let's do another evaluation so you can be more efficient in your organization. I understand that too. I support those things. So I think I would like to see us come to some kind of consensus sooner rather than later of where we think we're going to go and what service levels we want to maintain after January 1, 2026.
Me too. And it's the same thing is true for the county staff, right? We're having the same conversations about, so again, no human is more important than one another. All this stuff, we have to figure out how to have these systems. We started this year by saying, we're calling this the public safety financing because we've got to figure out how to fund the public safety team. And we're part of with different departments, different governments. There's 5 different governments with law enforcement departments and on and on. I'm going to stop rambling. I'm going to get us back to, let's just hear other people's thoughts about if we're in a property tax scenario, if we're not going after the option that lets us meet our needs at the same time under the same ballot measure, how would we think about sequencing that? And are we on the same page there?
George, I just want to add, if members of the general public heard what Jeremy just said or what Kelly just said, it would have got through.
Absolutely. I agree.
And I think with reasonable public outreach, a fire authority is going to pass. I'm just being brutally honest. I am much more pessimistic if it includes the sheriff's department, and I'm just saying what I think a lot of people feel. So I'm very optimistic with fire authority, but again, you bring the sheriff's department in, and I think it significantly diminishes the chances, and that may be very unfair, but I honestly feel that way.
George, I'm hearing 2 things and I just want to clarify. One is a mill levy for fire, correct? And one is increasing property taxes. Are those the 2 things we're talking about?
Those are the same thing.
Those are the same thing.
Well,
Except they're
So-
different
Except they're different.
pots, which
Right.
I was lumping everybody together. I thought the whole increase in mills would help you too. So, sorry.
I thought we had, at some point, I thought I heard a dedicated mill levy for fire. Did I not hear that?
I think you were probably hearing Colton say a dedicated sales tax, a public safety tax is probably
A
what.
couple of meetings ago, we did talk about a dedicated mill levy for fire, and those numbers are still good, and they were presented very similarly, but that's inside the fire district. The math is very different on how much revenue that generates, what the mill rate would have to be, right? This, because this is a countywide audience, is for the whole county, right? And because the fire district does not incorporate both, it doesn't have the whole county under its jurisdiction.
Right.
All of that modeling looks very different. And so for the sake of a countywide general mill, that does not include the fire department. If it is a mill increase within the fire authority district, I think it's 9 that we modeled. It's a different number, right? It's a different conversation, right? Because if the county issues something countywide, it's including taxpayers that are not in the fire authority. And that's the issue.
Fire authority district is a different than this presentation.
Yes.
Okay.
This is just countywide. Everything here was countywide. That's how we decided to set the conversation for just talking about this. Now, that doesn't mean that it's in any way an attempt to disvalue the need of the fire
But
authority.
I'm just hearing there's 2 separate things going on, right?
And there'd be 2 separate ballot issues.
Right, and that's the 2 ballot issues that I was trying to get
Yeah.
at. So the one thing we know, or we feel that we know, is that the fire district ballot issue has a good opportunity to pass based on feedback, just anecdotal feedback from people. Well, so then the conversation becomes, what do we do with this presentation's ballot measure? Is that the question?
This is just new numbers for you, right?
Number set.
Then that's what the countywide ballots would generate. there is a completely different presentation on what the CFA or CCFA district.
Okay, thank you.
That doesn't mean that one goes before the other. To echo George, this is just about information sharing.
Yep.
This isn't about our attempt to prioritize. We want to have a larger conversation about what order they go in.
So two could go on the ballot
Yes.
at the same time.
I don't, I'm not gonna vote for that.
Okay,
And like, that's just not an option. If you put two tax increases on the same ballot, some people pick A, some people pick B, they both fail.
yep,
Yeah.
I got you. Okay,
So, all right, so I'm in the East End, which is not in the Clear Creek Fire Authority. So my ballot, if we do Fire Authority, and something else to help the general fund, my ballot would just show the general fund, but in the Fire Authority area, they would have both.
Right. And that's the complicating thing here is that we do have districts.
Right.
In that some people, if you did say the CCFA mill increase and a 1% countywide public safety impact, there would be two ballot measures within the residents inside the CCFA, right? On one vote and one on the east side of the county.
And how do your constituents on this end of the county feel about, you know, we can make a good argument. We need EMS, you know,
clearly.
we need help. I mean, I understand about the sheriff, but I keep trying to impress upon people, the sheriff, the fire, the EMS all have to respond to I-70 issues, and that's taking away from our people. I know the sheriff's office has, you know, is working through some bad experiences, and that's why people are pissed at them. But if we can kind of push the fact that, I mean, we all need sheriff's protection, and we don't want them always on I-70 because that's the only staff they have. So would this end of the county, with a good marketing campaign, would we be able to run both the CCFA and a public safety? I mean, public safety, taxes, big umbrella, and then underneath CCFA and EMS. EMS needs more people to help us.
Yes.
We cannot in a single ballot measure do that.
I know. Well, we can, I've seen on ballots, you know, the issue and then two ballot measures underneath it. So they would have to vote on two separate issues on the ballot, but it's under the public safety umbrella. Or is that a Brenda question?
How did we do health?
That's a Peter question.
Your question.
Peter question.
Repeat the question.
If we have, okay, so this is excluding my district, a ballot question, and we say, increase, you know, public taxes for public safety. One, Clear Creek Fire Authority, yes or no. Two, two separate issues, EMS and, you know, sheriff.
So like the
There
Fire
are two
authority-
things to vote on.
the fire authority property tax and the, say a 2% public safety tax
You wouldn't,
under the same heading?
you couldn't do that here because of the distinction between E ESGID and the county.
Because they're separate.
County can do its public safety tax. E ESGID may not do a public safety tax.
Okay, so E ESIG does ask for a mill levy increase.
Right.
And then the county asks for a public safety sales tax.
Right. Two separate ballot measures.
Okay. And even with, you know, us doing our town halls and impressing upon them the need for this, everybody knows we need help for any fire. The sense is that our constituents wouldn't.
We have a survey on the streets that's going to give us some real information on that, but I mean, Chuck has his read of the tea leaves and he might be right.
Kelly.
To clarify one more thing, the County Emergency Services District is the unincorporated area only. It doesn't include the municipalities. Just in case that wasn't clear.
But if there's a fire in downtown Idaho Springs, do you have your own fire department?
No, Idaho Springs pays out of their general fund. So
Oh, pays you guys.
right now, it's like a 4.5 mil. The E ESGID collects a property tax that shows up uniquely on someone's property tax bill and gives it to the fire authority.
For unincorporated only.
The Idaho Springs, Georgetown, Empire, Silver Plume write a check to the fire authority out of their general funds, with the exception of Silver Plume, for that same portion of their assessed value.
Okay.
So
I thought they were over, I thought they were at 9 mils equivalent.
Municipalities are at 9.
you're right. Okay, the municipalities are currently paying at 9.
So is the money that you need coming to ESGID, or is it a municipality level increase that you guys need?
Need to, if we could get the ESD to come up to the 9 mil equivalent, we could continue business for a little bit longer.
So it's an ESD, what are the letters?
Yeah, yes.
ESD. So it's the ESD mill levy that we're on a county or fire district level that needs to have this increase.
And that's just to give us a little more time. We still need a 0.5% sales tax for
12,
another
13, right?
On a
5
county
mills.
level or a municipal level sales tax? Does that always count?
And
It's a county level.
Okay,
So we either need, we need that as well
okay,
to do the,
to get it right.
to quit deficit spending and to have some capital reserve
Okay,
and keep our staff. So it's a little more complex than we just need. We need something next year to survive.
which is the ESD that we're talking about now.
That's one thing.
Okay,
If we get a 0.5% sales tax next year, we have a little more time extra.
okay.
Jody, you had a question?
I just wanted to say, I feel like my 4 kids just came home from school and all need a ton of stuff for their sports or whatever, and I don't have the money to pay for all this. I know people don't want to hear this, but I have been to other meetings, childcare meeting and stuff, and people talk about how low the taxes are in Clear Creek County.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that maybe if Colton could get together something that explains this a little bit for us to talk to the public, because today people really got confused on the mills and the taxes and the special districts. And maybe if you could get together something, so when we're going to these town halls, we can just, explain it a
You
little
break it
better.
out a little bit to see it, yeah.
Or even, I know people hate doing this because we're unique and we're wonderful, but even showing how much Jeffco pays in
Boy.
property and sales tax. I mean, I know people in my neighborhood specifically moved to the Clear Creek side because it was so inexpensive. I was clueless. I just liked the house, but happy to be here. But it's like I grew up in upstate New York, and New York has horrible tax. I mean, not horrible taxes. They have very high taxes, so we have good schools and good roads and everything else. So if we could just let people know that, we are still being very modest and we're being frugal with their money, but we need help. And just look at Jeffco sales taxes and, I mean, I don't know if you throw in Summit, but.
I think it might be helpful. I just got into the Zoom meeting so I can share this spreadsheet about the various funding scenarios for the CCFA. It's occurring to me that it's been a month. Georgia, you weren't here for it. Can we just spend 5 minutes talking through that?
But it's up to everybody. Yeah, you can send it to me separately, whatever works well for the group.
I can use it.
Let's just go through it. So these are not readable right now, and it's fine. What I wanted to point out to you is you have 3 columns here. You've got, this is BEST is funding everything. This came out of the Mission CIT assessment. BEST is funding everything that Mission CIT said we needed, right? And it calls for $5 million new dollars into the fire authority. Then we came up with this better column, which calls for about $3.3 million to the new fire authority. Now I'm going to zoom in over here. As we've gone through this exploration, we've decided that we've defined a good. that we think we support. And I'm going to stop making your eyes hurt in just a second. Okay, here we go. So this is what good would get us, right? It would fill our current operating deficit. It would get us some capital. And it would do some of the things we picked out of the mission CIT report as being the most crucial, like having a dedicated fire inspector, and expanding our mitigation crew. That calls for about $2 million in new taxes to the fire authority. This is a breakdown of how these different options that we're talking about, what they would require, right? So if we're looking at meeting all of this with sales tax, if you include food in the sales tax base, you're talking about 3/4. You're talking about around 1% if you exempt food from that measure. Come down here. If you're doing mills to 9 and you're sales taxing the rest, you're talking about 5% that you would ultimately need in a sales tax. Now, this is the option that without the municipalities changing their budgets at all, the ESGID can get on the ballot for a 4.5 mil increase. And then we need to next year, 2 years from now, sooner than 10 years from now, be on the ballot with a sales tax measure to fund fire. And I've got with exempting food and without exempting food, what would need to be in there. This is all just for the fire department, right? If we're talking about the fire department's going to meet its needs with a property tax only, you're talking about a final mill rate of just under 14 mils. So that this means, and this is why I was asking how much the municipalities thought they could increase their contribution, either through a ballot measure, finding savings somewhere else in your general fund, et cetera, right? So that would mean the municipalities would have to increase their contribution again by another about 5 mils. I think that's the relevant stuff here. But before I stop the screen share, does this clarify kind of the options and the need and what's going on with the fire authority?
Well, yeah, but I'm looking at this thinking, when you made it smaller, all the way over on the right-hand side, it was the best scenario, right?
Yeah.
Why don't we just do that? I mean, I understand there's public things and I understand, but I think if people understand the need, I mean, do we want to fix this every 2 years?
What I hear when you say, why don't we just do that?
Yeah.
I hear that we are going to watch the county reduce its staffing by 60 people.
Exactly.
We're okay with that. I can't tell you I'm okay with that.
No, of course not. Yeah.
This one that he's zoomed in on is what we've come up with as something that will work for us for now and a little bit into the future.
Right.
Without asking for a bunch of money. It's kind of like.
Sure.
This is the least we feel comfortable with.
And I understand that because what all it means is that in every 2 to 5 years, we're going to be doing this.
I don't think that's true.
Okay.
I don't think that's true. We've got in good, we've got a current operating deficit that we're filling. We've got an annual capital fund that's robust so that we can buy fire trucks and make sure our stations are good. And we're hiring a new inspector. We're increasing wages to be competitive.
So this is kind of
At this point, I think we would all expect that the fire department would be able to meet its needs in the medium run. In the long run, we're all dead and everything is different every day, right?
It's most reasonable.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So
The other one
last
came-
question.
The other one came from a study that some outside folks came in and what they thought without minimal input from our fire authority would be the best scenario.
Okay. Well, I can certainly appreciate reasonable and meeting the needs and, going more than 2 years into the future. Colton, you mentioned that half of the activities in this county are not taxed.
Economic activities, yeah.
Economic, why is that?
Transaction.
Can we tax them?
Sales tax doesn't apply to services.
Can that change?
Tried.
Refer to George on that one.
We talked to the governor.
That's a governor thing?
Well, it's a governor and a legislature thing.
Okay.
Yeah. The counties don't have options that you all have. You all tomorrow could put on the ballot to have a tax on the rafting companies or lift tickets if you had lifts in your areas. You can do that tomorrow. County can't do that. The voters don't even have the option to have a conversation We just watch these transactions happen for free and demand our services, and we can't do anything about it, except for complain to the legislature, and maybe someday they'll listen.
I do have a question on that because I had the rafting group at my table at the economic thing. And he was talking about the $2 a head. Where does that money go to? He said that was considered the service tax, what he thought of.
Oh, the fee goes into our general fund. We can spend it on anything. They want to see us, of course, spend it on river access. And we're like, hey, maybe we want to have an ambulance that can show up. And the numbers that are being generated by that river access fee are less than $100,000. I think half of 100. I think less than 50, but I don't want to overstate the case.
Yeah, George, I think you're right.
Yeah,
Also based on our dollar.
yeah, it's less than 100. I don't know about less than 50, but it's not a huge amount of money. And that's per person, right? So if that person pays $150 to take a rafting trip, $2 goes to the county, and it's not sales tax. If we just had 2.65% sales tax on that $150 rafting trip, that's considerably more than $2.
Yeah.
Right? So, and it's all the other things, right? So, that's just a matter of their throughput. If you assign, the fee is our direct cost to providing the access per head. That's throughput. The way to increase revenue is send 1 million people down the river, right? They can't do that, right? So it doesn't keep up with costs because their prices might increase, their throughput might not, right? So that's just proportionally they start separating, and that's kind of what's happening.
And you, like, to Jody's point, like what you're not seeing in this presentation about the county's sustainability is what we hear from the public every day about how little we're investing in childcare,
Exactly.
right? Housing. The amount of dollars that we're putting towards wildfire mitigation, we may be the lowest in the state in terms of a county that's in the WUI and what we're doing about wildfire mitigation. These are all just, these are all things that matter. And I am not trying to say fire doesn't. So other comments about sort of which, I'm going to take that off the screen, sorry. Other comments about these various options, how to sequence them. Chuck, I hear you. Well, I'm going to stop there because I have thoughts too, but my fear in going property tax first is that we're a bunch of ballot cycles away from any of us sort of approaching line of sight, putting a Band-Aid on that gets us from the 3 to 5 years that we're all saying we have to something like 10. I see a lot of value, and this is just about trying to navigate Tabor. I see a lot of value in a tax measure that can fund all of the emergency services needs at the same time and go from we have a fiscal emergency to we've got line of sight. Like now we're within range, and then we can start talking about successive property tax questions to go from we're barely sustainable to, and we might have some difficult decisions to actually we feel like we're in pretty good shape and we can promise these services are sustainable in the long run. So that's my perspective, and my pitch is that it's safety sales tax measure that we can this year tell Jeremy and his team and Brian and his team, we've got your backs. We value what you do for the people in Clear Creek County, and we can sustain these services on some level.
Okay, so I'm still wrapping my brain around it. How does a public safety sales tax help the Clear Creek Fire Authority if they can only be funded through mills?
Because that last thing that you said isn't right.
Okay, thank you.
We can run a public safety sales tax and dedicate a portion of that to fire.
Oh,
And we can do it in a way that the voters approve. I'm doing this % increase and this much is going to fire and this much is going to sheriff and EMS. We can do that. We can write a ballot question tomorrow.
And I can share those. Hang on one sec. Sure. That is in here, right? So you take the complication with the mills off. That's these two.
So you're talking about generating between up to 5 million. If you take food out, 3.7. I kind of think you have to take food out for it to pass. And so you're talking about $3.7 million that we can have a conversation about what's the right split so that we're putting both entities on reasonably solid footing over the next, go from 4 years, we have an emergency in 4 years, to we have an emergency in 8 or 9 or 10.
Jeremy's not looking happy. Does that help?
Sounds like a 1% or 2%, right? I don't think we can probably push a 2%, right? When you talk to people that say, well, what's gonna cost me more, property tax or sales tax? When you say 2% of sales tax, it costs you X. And it's more than what the property tax increases, it's gonna affect. That's the conversations we've been having too, and it's exactly what you brought up last meeting, is the reality of it is trying to find that blend, and that blend look like is, if it is 1% public safety tax, which makes sense. The rest of it has to come from property taxes, and how do you sequence it, how do you convince people it's a good idea?
Yeah.
That's always gonna be the issue is. Jeanette's in the same boat with, how does she go to the voters of Empire and say, hey, here's what the cost for each of them is. And this is what we think is the best option. I think it's gonna be a hard uphill battle on how we do it.
Oh, you guys, we're supposed to be done. Aren't we? We just blew through our hard stop.
No hard stop.
That's what I had.
Too far?
Way over. Well, not way over.
It was on my calendar ending at 1. I've got another meeting I'm supposed to be jumping in. I'm gonna tell him I'm just gonna have to be a little bit late.
So George, I have a question. So in the real positive world, we need $7 million. The county does.
But that doesn't have to come all at once. To
Right.
kind of the fire authority made this point.
So in 5 years down the road, we're looking at the $7 million. And then how much does the fire authority need on top of that? In a 5 year,
Under the good scenario, it's just under 2.
Yeah, we need combination of both, or I on one side. versus-
we're looking at 9 now, and then EMS.
That's EMS numbers.
It's included? Okay, so the E.
Yeah.
Okay,
But again, that doesn't have to all be through revenue. What we need to do is get close enough to buy enough time to look at things like economic development, right? About getting different industries in here, right? Because right now, we don't have the one way to rely exclusively on that, right? There is a future here where if we buy enough time, attracting development, attracting different kinds of industries, right? Looking at TIFs and all of this.
Selling the annex to a really good business.
Right, like that changes. Plus, the assessment rates might change, the property valuation might change, right? Sales tax revenue might outperform. Like there's a lot we don't know in the future, but what we do know is that for the fire authority in the county, we're on very similar timelines. All the county's funds, so Aaron's fund included, right? To not having anything at the same time, right? So we need to buy more time, and it's not very far.
that's what I'm just wondering, with all of this together, we're looking at $9 million then.
It doesn't necessarily need to be tax revenue, though.
Right,
Yes,
But that's the
Right.
number. Yeah,
I
think
mean,
that's
we
what
just
you're
did
driving at.
that.
yes.
Yeah.
That's the structural shortfall in $2025, right?
So if you could get a 2% sales tax and didn't exempt food, that the difference there funds your fire authority.
Right.
Because you'd basically be taking that, we're taxing it right now. But the difference would fund the fire authority and the sales tax has a lot better chance of passing if the fire authority is part of the package.
What is part of the package?
Yeah, at some point, I don't think we get this done without a sales tax that includes fire. And so the question is, how do we sequence these things? And so let me, Jeremy, you expressed some frustration. I share it.
Doing that.
I think the reason that this is, that we don't have a decision is because Tabor makes this fiendishly complex, right? And I'm not here to complain. I'm not trying to like turn this into a Tabor complaint. This is fiendishly complex, these options and these timelines and all of this stuff. And so I think we've done a good job today of, I think, building our understanding of what these options actually are and what the impacts of them are. In terms of the rest of our timeline, we need to notify the clerk in June-ish that we're going to be on the ballot. We already know today that we're going to make that notification. We've got another meeting in June. We should schedule it. And we should plan on, we wanted to have the opportunity to really share clearly what the county's up against. I think in the next meeting, we're going to really try to flesh out these options and see if we can come to a unified decision. Ultimately, it is the Board of County Commissioners that will put any of these options on the ballot. And we have you all here because we value your opinions. And frankly, we know that we're not passing a whole lot of tax measures when the mayors of a third of the population of Clear Creek County are saying, don't vote for this. Right. So we have to get on the same page, and we can. We've come up really, really far in the last year and a half. Jeremy, this is not the only time you've been frustrated in a meeting. It's not the only time I've been frustrated in a meeting. This bus has wheels on it, So does that sound like a reasonable next step?
Okay, so we have a hard and fast deadline to get the ballot measure to the clerk by June what?
Oh, the actual ballot language is August or September.
September, but
Yeah.
I defer to Peter, but I think we need to give her a heads up in July, August that we're coming.
We need to let her know that the clerk and recorder at the beginning of July that we intend to have a ballot measure. We also need to let the Department of Revenue know, have some draft language for it.
So,
Because we've been talking about these issues for a long time. And I really feel like we need to start drafting something to move this process along so that we can get more money or the potential after this next election.
yeah, the most important thing everybody in this room can do to help in the service of that is do their best to retain the information we went through today.
Yeah.
Right. This is so complex. We often have to start the conversation at the beginning again.
Right, sorry.
So I think-
No, I like you've been trying to wrap your head around 1,000 things for a few months. So
Yeah, and so this is just about information sharing. This was not meant to be precedent setting or priority setting. This is this is the county situation, and the county in a nutshell. The fire authority has their own very important situation, but they're the same and not the same, right? Our methods to solve them are not the same, right? We do have an issue of a third of our county's population does not live in the fire authority.
Right.
Changes the evaluation, changes the sales tax generation, it changes a lot of things, it changes it politically. Because they're already paying 12 mils for fire, right?
A meaning me.
Yeah, and me.
Yeah.
So we just want to be as transparent and have as much information as possible about what the impacts are. You can.
Well, that's another good thing, not just having Jeffco, but mention that the east side of the county is paying more in mills than the west side of the county. Because I think people will listen to that and go, oh, it's not like I'm being picked on, it's
They're paying
everyone.
more mills on more expensive homes too.
Right.
That's part of the reason why they can fully fund their fire department and EMS on just mills alone, because their average home value is.
Well, and their mill rate's
12,000.
We can do it with a mill rate of 14.
Yeah.
We're not that far off.
Yeah.
You all, it's important for me to be able to attend the next meeting, so I need to know when it is, and I got to run to another one. So can we jump into that conversation?
So our next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're expecting survey results when?
Soon. I called the consultant this morning. I did not get him.
Yep.
But I'm pretty sure it closes pretty soon, doesn't it?
I can do another final push too.
So are we thinking we want to do this third week of June? The week starting June 16th? If we were sticking with our regular schedule, we would be starting around 11 on Monday, the 16th.
I did have this 11 to 1:30 for today.
Okay. You have it 11 to 1:30?
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah, that's what I had.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, well, then I made a mistake on my calendar. I'm sorry. How do I don't have to one.
So you're looking at June 16th
I have
at
to one.
11
We do have the Henderson,
at 1:30?
Yeah, mine was at 11:30.
I think is.
Yeah, 1:30.
11:30 to 1.
The CPP ends at 11:30?
And it's in Summit.
Oh,
Yeah, the Henderson meeting starts at, oh no, I'm sorry, starts at 2,
I've got it before.
Summit County.
so we can end at 1 that day. Guys over there.
So can we do 11 to 1
What day?
The 16th.
on the 16th? Does that work?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good for us too.
Looking for a signal from Jeremy and Kelly?
Still,
I think I'm on vacation that week,
what day?
but I can probably.
It's like June 16th, 11 to 1.
June 16th, 11 to 1?
Here,
Okay.
And the outcome of that meeting, we'll know what we're gonna put on the ballot. So that's what we're coming prepared to
That's our goal.
figure out. Because 2 weeks later, we've got to
Right.
turn it in.
Yes, I agree with that.
That's our goal.
Brian's holding his head.
I mean,
It's possible.
I hope so.
in the very least, we need to know the critical questions that we need to go out and answer so that in July, we know what we're doing. We know right now, we have enough information to tell the clerk in July that we're ballot. That's all we need until August.
But summer schedules get away from us, so it'd be good to have our ducks.
These are hard conversations. We don't have a history in this county of doing hard conversations well. I think we're getting better. I think today's. You're adjourned.